We have Isabel Oakeshott with us, Talk's international editor. Story that broke in the last hour or so, Isabel. 7 men found guilty of using 2 teenage girls as sex slaves in Rochdale. This was Minshull Street Crown Court in Manchester, hearing evidence in relation to 53 sexual offences believed to have been committed between 2001 and 2006 over 72 days. This is a particularly disturbing story for quite obvious, demonstrable reasons. Not the first we've heard of these kind of stories, and it won't be the last.
I mean, how absolutely disgusting. I think the first thing that struck me actually as you read that was how historic this is. You said between 2001 and 2006.
20 years ago.
Best part of 20 years ago. So, I mean, serious questions to be asked as to why this has only been prosecuted now. You know, what a set of extraordinary failings that represents. When I looked at the case, it seems that the poor victims concerned were dismissed as prostitutes, you know, when they first complained. They were young teenagers. I mean, how on earth can this possibly have been allowed? You know, even if they were prostitutes, you know, as young teenagers, they were below the age of consent. So there was a massive safeguarding issue there. I mean, you can't be legally a prostitute at any age, but certainly not at 13 or 14. Why didn't the council step in to take these poor girls into care, get them out of the reaches of these absolutely disgusting middle-aged individuals? I mean, it's truly appalling. As we all know, it's the tip of the iceberg. And it's devastating that this was allowed to go on such an industrial scale. And
do you know what? When I read these stories, Isabel, if I was reading them from, you know, if they'd happened in 1950 or 1960, I might just about get my head around why, you know, the establishment didn't act. You know, young girls who do this kind of stuff, you know, are probably wrong-uns anyway, blah, blah, blah. None of that would be justifiable or okay, but you could kind of see a strange, odd, almost still a legacy of Victorian thinking around, you know, kids being badly behaved, etc. But this is, you know, although 25 years ago, it's in the 2000s, and some of it after that, where we had, I know this goes over old ground, but the same thing again, whether it was a police officer, law enforcement, council, social services, blaming the victims every step of the way, to the point in some of these cases, you know, they raided a house where there were 2 young girls in there and 5 men. And I think the young girls were arrested for underage drinking or something. No question about what you were doing in a house with 5 45-year-old men.
Yeah, I mean, this was during the Blair years, this particular case. I mean, it's hardly kind of, you know, another century, another era altogether. It's astonishing. It really is astonishing. I think that's been part of the problem, is that it is so jaw-droppingly unbelievable that I think that much of the establishment, policymakers, media commentators and so on, just almost didn't believe it. And that's why it failed to get the traction it deserved, you know, until frankly this year. It was too big, too awful, too horrible, too what, you know, when I used to work for tabloid papers, I'm afraid editors used to call low life. You know, they dismissed this sort of thing as a low life. These people are beyond redemption, you know, whether it's the perpetrators or the poor, totally neglected and abused girls themselves. You know, many parts of the media, certainly historically, have not really wanted to run stories about people that are glossy and look like, you know, the kind of victims that their readers can relate to.
Let's move to this story. Huge overnight development in the Middle East, of course. Benjamin Netanyahu's government, Israel, launching preemptive strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Explosions heard in Tehran, targeting those areas and military sites. Israel claiming responsibility for the attacks, saying, you know, this is preemptive and this is essentially our security duty to do this. America slightly quiet on this at the moment, it seems, Isabel. Lots of criticism coming in towards Israel. Their point would be, we sit there as a lone figure of a country. We have people who hate us and people who want to kill us. We're protecting our people.
Well, I don't know why people are criticizing Israel for this. I mean, Iran has vowed the annihilation of Israel. Israel, it's so easy to forget how tiny Israel is. When you look at the map of the Middle East, Israel makes so much noise, it has so much influence on the world stage and is so dominating in geopolitics that people might imagine that it's this enormous kind of superpower. It's tiny,
Yeah.
and it's surrounded in a sense by regimes that basically want to see the end of it. And Israel has taken the view that their latest intelligence shows that Iran was getting far too close to being able to be even more destructive
Yeah.
and reckless with nuclear weapon capability than it has been to date. So this is preemptive, and it appears to have been pretty effective in taking out some very senior scientists in Iran and striking at the heart of Iran's nuclear weapon creation and enrichment capability. And, our listeners may wonder, what do we make of all this? This sort of flares up periodically. Does it become a bigger thing? Is it contained? Is it just a bit of a tit for tat? And mercifully, usually it is a bit tit for tat. Israel or allies will take out some capability from Iran. Iran will say, we're not having that, and lob back a few weapons. Hopefully nobody except very bad people get hurt, and then everything calms down again. And that's of course the hope in the region, that that's where this ends up.
And we did hear as well that President Trump did acknowledge that he knew this was going to happen. He had prior knowledge of it, but said there was no American involvement in the attack. Donald Trump has also posted that on his Truth Social feed as well. But no involvement from the Americans, they say. Just a final word, Isabel, bit of deja vu here. I sense hapless French cops are stopping fewer migrants crossing the Channel despite a £480 million deal, of course, from this country in March. For every migrant turned back, 2.36 reached the UK, raising concerns over the agreement's effectiveness. Let's have a listen to Sun reporter Ed Southgate on this point.
It's 5 a.m. here in Gravelines beach in France, where around 80 to 100 migrants have just got into a motor dinghy behind me, ready to make their way to British shores. They're watched on by about 10 police officers, all in riot gear, just watching on, doing absolutely nothing. They say they can't do anything once the migrants are in the water because it's too dangerous. Now, there is actually one adult with a toddler on their shoulders. There in the group you can see behind me who have missed the boat.
Nothing we haven't seen before, Isabel, but every time we hear this story, we just think, what the heck is what do you get for £500 million?
Absolutely nothing. I mean, you get being made a mockery of. Yeah, the police say they can't do anything once the migrants have reached the water. Surely begs the question, why didn't you stop them getting into the water in the first place?
Well, yeah, they must have. I mean, they're talking here not about migrants who are half a mile out. They're talking about people who are literally paddling in their shoes in shallow water. I mean, the guy with the kid on his shoulder.
They didn't get parachuted into the water. They came from land into the water.
And walked in, yeah.
I mean, this is just unbelievable. And what Keir Starmer seems to think the answer to this is to plough yet more money into our so-called, what is it, UK Border Command, whatever it was. I mean, they announced earlier this week, Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, announced yet more multi-million pounds for a border command centre that has demonstrably failed in its remit to command the borders. The Sun reporter there is just watching it happening. Where is the border command? What effect has it had? You don't get better results simply throwing more money at an organisation that has done nothing.
Yeah. Spot on. And there we see it with our own eyes. If anybody wanted evidence of ineptitude, then literally that is the dictionary definition. Isabel, thank you. Have a great weekend. I was about to say enjoy the sunshine, but where you are, it's always sunny, isn't it? It's going to be a nice weekend, though, at this end. Thank you to her.